Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rapid Results. We have such a special guest today, one of my friends and mentors and colleagues, the wonderful, amazing Chris Widener. And in case you're wondering who this Chris Widener guy is, he has been named one of the top 50 speakers in the world, a member of the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. He has written 23 books that have sold millions of copies, that's been translated into 14 languages. And that's actually how I found him in the first place. Is when I was in college, I was Googling who are the top paid speakers in the world, reached out to Chris. He's like, hey, Andrew, how's it going? So Chris, tell us, what is the biggest, most badass professional deal that you're most proud of?
Well, probably my book, The Angel Inside. I wrote it as a self-published book. We sold 120,000 copies, self-published. Random House bought it for their currency imprint, and it launched at number 2 on the Wall Street Journal, number 7 on the New York Times, and number 3 on Amazon. Not number 3 on some Amazon category, number 3 on Amazon. And the only two that beat me out that week were the pre-launch of a Harry Potter book and the lost manuscript of J.R.R. Tolkien that his grandson found in his attic after he died. So I figure if you're going to be number 3 on Amazon to the, probably the greatest fiction series of all time and one of the greatest authors of all time, that's pretty cool. And then we turned it into a wine and food tour business in Italy because the book was based in Florence, Italy. And so now we take groups of about 20 people to Florence, Italy, just outside of Florence in the hillside of Tuscany. And we visit all those great cities. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a great book. It's the book that I love the most of all the books I've written. It's great. It's a great book. It's got history, it's got art, it's got spirituality, it's got geography, it's got just a ton of great things. So that's probably, off the top of my head, that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of professionally.
Oh my goodness. And wasn't that, and tell us what year was that book released, or did you get number 3 in the world?
2004, and then I think 2007 is when Random House released it as a, so we had a few years where we were selling copies as a self-published book.
Oh, you said we, you co-wrote the book?
No, we meaning my team, our team. Yeah.
Gotcha.
The company.
Angel Inside. So check that out. So what I like to do, Chris, is I like to tell the superhero journey. How the heck do you go from being born and raised in a town to then happening to write one of the most top-selling books in the country, if not the world? Like, how the heck do you get there? And feel free to tell us the 3 to 5 minute story leading up to that.
Yeah, so I had a really crazy upbringing. My dad was actually doing quite well. 1969 was the last year that he was alive. I was born in 66. So 1969, I was 3 years old, and my dad made $90,000 in 1969. I say that sometimes in crowds today, and people go, wow, $90,000. Most Americans don't make $90,000. So in 1969, it was a lot of money. We lived in a big house in a country club in Seattle. He was an architect, CFO of an architecture firm, which is, at the time, it had 150 architects. Now it has thousands and thousands. It's one of the largest architecture firms in the world. They did either the Google campus or the Facebook campus. I can't remember which, but 1970, May 1st, he woke up, flu-like symptoms. Long story short, 6.5 months later, middle of November, he was dead at the age of 41. Began a downward spiral for my mother and I. My brothers and sisters were all older than me, considerably so that they moved out shortly thereafter my dad died. I was kind of a whoops baby. And so began to get involved in drugs and alcohol starting in the 5th grade. Was in trouble all the time in school. I was smoking opium by the time I was in 8th grade. I made most of my money growing up betting the horses at Longacres Horse Track. 28 homes, 11 different schools. My mom, she flipped houses before it was popular on television to be a house flipper. And so we would move around. She'd buy a house, we'd move in, she'd sell it. I don't know why she didn't flip houses in the same school district, so I could have stayed in the same school, but ended up going to a ton of different schools. But that actually helped me because it taught me to be able to move into a new place and make friends quickly. 10th grade year of high school, I got 47 written referrals to the principal's office. And I know because on the last day of 10th grade, my principal, Bob Davidson, called me into his office. He had a stack of papers. And he said, you have 47 written referrals. We need to cut those way down next year. So ended up doing that. got my life turned around summer before my senior year of high school. Figured I better figure something out, and did. Change my life, turn my life around, and eked my way into college. Went to a college whose primary decision on whether or not you can come to school there was not your grade point, not even those things. It was whether or not the check cleared or not. But I got a degree in youth and family work, and then I started speaking right out of college, because people wanted to know how this crazy upbringing turned into, a person who had graduated from college and was making a difference. So high school, summer camps, colleges, those kinds of things, started speaking there. And then eventually I was asked to ghostwrite for a guy named John Maxwell. A couple of years I wrote his nationally syndicated column. And then that led to being asked to work with Jim Rohn, and ended up co-writing his last book ever written, 12 Pillars. Ended up with a TV show in Dallas, my own TV show called Made for Success. And then Zig Ziglar asked me to co-host his television show, and that was called True Performance. People can still find that on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Ziglar, True Performance, Widener, some combination of those, you can still watch those old television shows. And people say, how long ago did you do that? And I say, about 30 pounds ago. So that's about how long ago it was.
And I want to go back a little bit. Like, they make it seem like there's always this big moment in your life. You're like, oh, from here on out, I'm going to change things. Is that what happened to you in high school? Was there like a moment where you were just like,
yep. I spent the night with my biggest pot smoking buddy, and Saturday night. And Sunday morning, his mother, who was all of about 4 feet 11 inches tall, threw the door open and said, "Get up, we're going to Sunday school." And I at this point, Andrew, I had no idea what Sunday school was. I'd never heard the term. I didn't know anything about church or God or anything. Like, I would pray sort of randomly, when I needed help. And I got invited to this little Lutheran church. And so I went there, and there was a youth minister there, and he was from Helena, Montana. He was a good old boy from Helena, Montana. And his name was Sam. And Sam was great for me on a couple reasons. Number one, I had never had a father figure. My dad died when I was 4. One of my grandpas left. I only met him one time in my entire life. My other grandpa died when I was young. I lived with an uncle. My mom shipped me off to live with relatives twice, but he beat me half to death most days, to the point where 40 years later on his deathbed, his daughter called me up, my cousin, and said, will you come see your uncle? And I met with him a couple of days before he died, where he asked me for forgiveness because he was sad for all the times he'd beaten me so bad. And so my brother, who was 13 years older than me, he married a girl who didn't like my mom. So I rarely saw him. So I really had no male role models growing up other than this youth minister. So he did 2 things. Number one, he was a father figure. He had, I like to tell people, he had size 11 cowboy boots. That's what I needed. And, if you know what I mean. And then he taught me about God, and particularly about how we have a purpose in life, and how we have a grand scheme that is designed to be followed, and that my job was to figure out what that was. And I've always had the gift of gab. In high school, I was the kid who did morning announcements. Remember when homeroom hit, and it's like, okay, everybody stand up. It's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. And today at lunch is going to be fish sticks and tater tots. And, the junior varsity and varsity football teams, please be at the bus by 4 p.m. to go to the game. All those kinds of announcements. Did that. I did college basketball, both on the radio and in-house. Did radio in Seattle. So I've always sort of used my voice and my speaking ability. I've done 2,500 speeches all over the world. Have always really used that as part of my my purpose and my plan to help encourage other people and challenge other people to live the lives of their dreams.
That is incredible. And I feel like people don't talk about that enough, like the importance of having a spiritual aspect to yourself. In your opinion, what is the difference between being spiritual and being religious?
Yeah, I think religion is rules and regulations, and spirituality is about a relationship with God, is sort of the way I view it. I don't think that God is this giant ogre up there just waiting to beat people over the head. I believe what the Bible tells us, that God loves people. I don't think he would have created us if he didn't believe in us. And, in fact, that reminds me, one of my favorite quotes from a movie Jim Caviezel is a great actor, and he was in a movie called The Count of Monte Cristo, where he was put into prison, wrongfully imprisoned. And he was in this prison cell, this dank, dark prison cell with this much older man. And at one point, the old man asks him, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "I don't believe in God." And the old man says, "That's okay. He still believes in you." And I like that, right? Because there's a lot of people, we all sort of ebb and flow with our relationship with God and our beliefs, and they vary and those kinds of things. But God believes in us. And I think that that's an important lesson for us to remind ourselves of, that God believes in us and created us with a plan and a destiny. And it's our job to find that and live it.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples of that too is in the Sistine Chapel. If you look and God and the human about to touch fingers, God has his finger fully extended, like saying, I'm here for you, I'm here for you. And it's the human who has the finger half extended, which is the only reason why they're not touching, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I love that perspective on things.
And in fact, it's a good tie-in back to the angel inside, because the last chapter in the book, The Angel Inside, is called "No One Starts with the Sistine Chapel." And it's about the trajectory of Michelangelo's life, starting out as a young man whose dad wanted him to be a politician. And he had to reject this idea that I'm going to be a politician. Instead, he became an artist. Artists were not very well regarded back then. And he ends up the big, he did the David, obviously, in Florence, which is what we visit when we go to Florence. But the big one was, the culmination of his career was the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, that is really cool. So speaking of, no one starts with the Sistine Chapel. It seems like once you discover the importance of religion and spirituality, it sounds like God is what gives you that confidence, that strength to accomplish everything. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories about God, and a lot of how does God interact with people? And I believe in the Bible. I read the Bible, but I think that a lot of people misuse the Bible. I think a lot of people use it as a weapon, and I don't believe that the Bible's intended to be a weapon. I believe that it's designed to be a roadmap. And so, for example, asking about God and the way I view God, is the most famous Bible verse in the world is John 3:16. You see it at sporting events. There's always some guy holding a little sign that says John 3:16. And that says, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only son, whosoever would believe in him would not perish but have eternal life." But it's interesting, the very next verse, and this would be kind of like the really successful accountant who lives next to a movie star. Everybody wants to go look at the movie star's house, and they don't realize there's a beautiful house right next door. So John 3:17, the verse right after it says, "For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world." And I think it's really interesting, because there's a lot of people of faith who it's all about God's condemning you, and you're a bad person, and you're going to go to hell. And I like that next verse. It says, he didn't come into the world to condemn the world. That wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to prove that you're so bad that you're going to go to hell. The goal was to say, hey, there's a roadmap. There's a way to live. There's a place, a path to peace, whatever analogy you want to create. And that's my view on faith, is that God is there to lead me and to guide me, born out of his love for me as one of his creatures. So that's sort of my perspective on Christianity. I'm a Christian, and that's my perspective on faith. And I think that it's the right one. I think it's backed up by the Bible.
Yeah, no, I love that. What you're saying is that something that frustrates me the most is the concept of original sin, where because we're born, we have to feel guilty for the rest of our lives because we're not living up to God or Jesus's standards. And life's too short to feel guilty.
Well, let me nuance that a little bit, Andrew, because I believe in original sin. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is G.K. Chesterton, the old Catholic theologian, and he said, he says, "Original sin is the only philosophy empirically validated by 3,500 years of human history." And so I think if you look back at the annals of time, there's one thing that's pretty easy to prove, and that is that people are sinners. Even the greatest, most loving, kind, the Mother Teresas, whoever, Gandhis, whatever, we all do things wrong. But I think the nuance I want to take, and I agree with you, is it's not designed to make us feel guilty. It's not, and that's the way a lot of people wield it, right? They're like, you're a sinner. You should feel guilty. You're terrible. I think my perspective is we're sinners, all of us, but God still loves us and God still likes us. I think God even likes us. And I think that God says, even though you sin, like we all do, we're all in the same boat, right? So if somebody's looking at you going, you're a sinner, all you have to do is go, well, you are too. We all are, right? And so, but the beauty of it is that in spite of that, God still loves us. God still has a plan for us. So that's sort of my take on original sin. I believe in it, but I also believe that it's been misused and has been misused in order to abuse people. And it's not supposed to abuse people. It's designed to make us realize our need for God and the fact that God is right there and willing to be there for us.
Well, that brings up a good question too, and I've had a good conversation with someone. I think it's mentioned in Romans that how the joke is like, oh, I'm gonna go steal a bike and it'll be okay because all I have to do is ask for forgiveness. So how do you balance that? That concept of understanding what, when it's okay not to sin, when it's okay to sin. Not to be so hard on yourself and understand like, hey, it happened, time to move forward versus, okay, do you reflect on this a little bit more? Like, how do you balance all that?
Well, there's an old theologian. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Bonhoeffer was a German theologian. And in fact, Bonhoeffer and his brother plotted to kill Adolf Hitler. And it got screwed up somehow. His brother was really into it. But anyway, Bonhoeffer ended up doing prison time and the whole thing. But he wrote a book, and it was about what he called costly grace. I think the book was called The Cost of Grace or Costly Grace or something like that. But he talked about cheap grace and costly grace. So somebody who says, oh, well, God's going to forgive me anyway, so I'm just going to go do my thing, right? Imagine if you did that with your wife, right? And you know what? She'll forgive me, so I'm going to cheat on my wife. It doesn't work that way. Now, I would also say that people don't say, well, I'm not going to cheat on my spouse because there's a rule that says I don't cheat on my spouse. We don't not cheat on our spouse because there's a rule against it. We don't cheat on our spouse because we love our spouse, if that makes sense, right? I think you can make an analogy of some sort in regard to our faith. We don't say, well, I'm going to go do this because God's going to forgive me anyway. But we also don't say, I'm going to obey because there's a rule about obeying. We say, I want to live for God because God loves me, because I'm in a relationship with God. Now, we still sin, we still make mistakes, we still get angry and yell at somebody or, whatever, tell a little white lie or whatever. But our response isn't, well, it's okay, God's going to forgive me anyway. It's, isn't it amazing that God forgives me? And because God forgives me, even when I fail, that makes me want to have a relationship, and it makes me want to do even better and to serve him and to do what's right. So that's what's called costly grace. Costly grace says, cheap grace says, forget it. It's okay. He'll forgive me anyway. We treat his grace very cheaply. And so that's, I think, the difference between those two. Somebody who's really serious about a relationship, they do it because they want to, not because they have to.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, what it comes down to the end of the day is, I've noticed, I feel like some people have higher consciousness and guilt levels than other people. Like some people are okay, taking advantage of people, beating up people, like, tearing other people down so they can get to the top. And some people who, in my experience, who are, I know people make fun of Christians too, because it's like, oh, I'm Christian, but I don't actually follow any Christian rules.
Yeah, exactly.
But in my experience, people who have a higher consciousness and do their best to have a moral high ground, they in my experience, they're better people to interact with and spend time with. So just out of curiosity too, why do you think there is that disparity of consciousness and guilt levels that people are okay with, essentially?
Well, I think some people grow up in religious groups that use a lot of guilt. and they don't understand the grace of God. They live more out of the law of God than the grace of God, and so they make everybody feel guilty. And they, and then there's all the made up rules, right? Women have to wear their hair long, and they can't wear pants, and they can't wear makeup, and men have to keep their hair above their ears, and you can't dance, and all these sort of things, right? And if you break the rule, now you're in trouble, and I had an interaction with a guy who was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he was all about, you can't go to church on Sunday, you have to go on Saturday, and it's this rule, right? And to me, it was more like, I'm just happy if people are taking, they call it the Sabbath, right? I'm like, if somebody will set aside time if it's Sunday morning or Saturday, great. You want to go to church on Saturday? Go to church on Saturday. But if you work Saturday through and your only day off is Wednesday, you want to go to church or wherever you go on Wednesday night, you set aside that time. We ought to all be applauding. That's great. You're setting aside time for your spirituality. But so many people get set on these rules, right? And I just don't see God as this guy who's up there with this little thing going, I'm going to check and make sure you follow every rule. And every time you don't, I'm going to blast you, or I'm going to make you have a car wreck, or your transmission's going to go out, or I'm going to punish you. I don't see that from what I read the Bible. I think God is serious about the way that we should live our lives. I think there's certainly some things that he gives us as guidelines, not to trip us up as a rule, but to give us a better life. My life verse is John 10:10, says, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. I believe that God wants us to have an abundant life. So let's just take one. One of the 10 commandments, shall not lie. Okay. Now, some people go, wait a minute. What do you mean we can't lie? God just doesn't want us to have any fun. In my opinion, when you think about what lying does, when you think about all the bad stuff that comes out of lying, right? Just start with mistrust. If you lie to your spouse, or you lie to your business partner, or you lie to your brother or your family, and they find out, there's broken relationship. It breaks relationships.
Well, you're talking about bad lying in circumstances that hurt people, because of course there's let's say you're trying to protect someone and someone else is out to get them for no reason. You have to lie to protect that person. But you're just talking about lying that hurts loved and caring ones that you don't need to lie per se.
Now, I personally don't think you ever have to lie, but
really,
that's my
even if
opinion.
the Nazis are at your door and they're like, "Hey, where's Anne Frank?" You're like, "Oh, she's in the basement."
Well, I think there's obviously different ways that you can approach those kinds of things, but
Mhm.
I don't know that we need to get into all that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when God gives us a way of living, it's
Mhm.
not supposed to be because he's the giant cosmic buzzkill, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
He's one who says, hey, life's going to be a lot better. If you don't murder, life's going to be a lot better. If you don't lie, you're going to have better relationships. If you don't commit adultery, things are going to be a lot better for you. If you honor your mother and father, and I'm just working off the 10 commandments at this
Yeah.
point,
Mhm.
right? If you honor your father and mother, life's going to be a lot better for you. And so to me, it's kind of like it's a shift in the way we view God. Is God the giant buzzkill in the sky who's just going, here's a bunch of rules, and it's just so you have no fun, or it's here's parameters. I view the laws of God, if you want to call them that, as what's the word I'm looking for? The guide rails along a road, right? You're driving along and you're maybe around the Grand Canyon, or you're in the mountains somewhere, and there's these guardrails along the side of the road. You don't say, look at those guardrails. Those guardrails are just there so we can't drive the way we want to drive. No, the guardrails are there to keep you on the road so you can get to your destination. They're to keep you
Mhm.
from going over the cliff and actually dying. And so my opinion is that God's law is a lot like they're like guardrails. They're designed to keep you on the road so you can enjoy your drive and you can get to your destination and not go over the edge and have all the problems. Because when you start thinking about, again, just for example, let's start with the 10 commandments. You start looking at these, you go, okay, look at all the bad things that happen if you actually were to do those things, that he
Yeah.
tells you not to do, or you don't do the things that he tells you to do. All of a sudden you go, life would be a lot better if I actually just kind of lived that way. So that's sort of my take on God's rules, so to speak, is they're designed not to hurt us, but to help us.
Yeah, and the two things I want to say real quick. One of them is there's like another text I saw where like person one is saying, "Hey, just so you know, you shouldn't do that if you want to live a fulfilled life." And then the person two goes, "But am I allowed to do that?" And person one goes, "Yeah, you're allowed to do it." And person two goes, "Okay, well, are you going to do it?" And person one goes, "No, I'm not." And just you got to remember too, like I like that. It's guardrails, it's recommendations, but it goes back to, we do have free will at the end of the day, and just understanding the consequences of your actions. And I think I just realized too, when you're talking about original sin, I love the quote too: "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making the world believe he didn't exist."
Yeah.
So you're just saying if we're not aware that we're capable of sinning in the first place, that's when it gets dangerous. But we shouldn't feel guilty all the time, saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person just for being here."
Yeah,
I'm saying that
a
correctly?
struggle. Life is a struggle. The Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, "The things that I want to do, I do not do. And the things that I don't want to do, these are the things I keep on doing." He was expressing this frustration, right? We
Mhm.
all like, I'm going to lose some weight. And then, you're like, I'm going to eat some ice cream. And you eat your ice cream and you go, I shouldn't have eaten the ice cream. I'm trying to lose weight.
Mhm.
It's the things that we don't want to do. We have this innate struggle and we do them anyway. And the things that we want to do, like go to the gym or save money or what, we have a hard time doing those. So to me, that's kind of the that's the struggle of life, and everybody has it. And that's the beauty of it is we're all in the same boat. Nobody gets to be self-righteous and say, well, look at me, I never break the rules, I never do this, I'm perfect. We're not. We're all in the same boat. We all need grace. And that's why I think when you find particular religions or members of a particular religion who are trashing other people, then that's self-righteousness. And self-righteousness has in my opinion, no role in spirituality.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I do want to shift gears a little bit here.
Yeah.
So it's been great to learn about like the foundations and like because I think well, what are your thoughts on this? I heard a quote from a guy who is a millionaire by the time he was 25, and he's a millionaire coach. And he says, gaining wealth is 90% mindset and 10% skill. I'm curious if what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I really believe that becoming a millionaire is relatively easy. I mean, look, just pick. I mean, if you say, I'm going to be an elementary school teacher, you're probably not going to be a millionaire. But if you say, I'm going to major in finance and get an internship at Goldman Sachs and I'm going to go to Wall Street, you'll probably be a millionaire by the time you're 26 or 27. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just a decision, right? If you're going to save your money rather than spend your money, that's just a decision. But that's a mindset and a choice. But I think it's relatively easy to become a millionaire. It's the fact that most people choose not to that's the real problem.
And that's very fascinating. I love that mindset shift and tweak. Is that I think that's what people are trying to figure out all the time: is how can I make $1 million selling lemonade, or how can I make $1 million selling my courses? How can I make $1 million doing this? So I think that's a good point. That people want to make $1 million a certain way, but they don't realize there's an easier way to do it. It might be dirty and not as appealing, but there's a way to do it. But you figured out how to be a millionaire doing what you want to do with the speaking and the books and the coaching and the programs. So that's less easy to do, right?
Well, but I utilize my gifts. My gifts were
Mhm.
speaking. I could have gone and been a brain surgeon. I mean, I would have had to, it'd taken me a while to get there based on my high school GPA. But I could have chosen a physician's route. I could have chosen an attorney's route. But again, let's say somebody says, I'm going to become an attorney. Now there's all these branches, different directions you can go. If you decide that you're going to be a public defender, probably never going to be a millionaire. If you decide that you're going to become a defense attorney, you're going to have a much easier route to become a millionaire because you're going to be charging $500 an hour, $1,000. I have a friend who charged $2,500 an hour
Wow.
as an attorney. And, he very quickly became a millionaire. And so, I just think that if you want to be a millionaire, there are some routes that you can use to become a millionaire. You think about selling courses. If you sell a course for $1,000, really easy to sell $1 million. You just got to sell 1,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
If only 1 out of every 100 people buys your course, you just have to advertise to 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
If it's half of 1 out of every 100 people, you just have to advertise to 200,000 people at $1,000 each. You've sold $1 million worth of courses. So, you just always got to break it down. And that's the easy part. It's the discipline to actually do it. It's the mindset that says you have something to say. Those are the kinds of things that separate the successful from the unsuccessful.
I love that. And how did you discover that, or decide that you wanted to become or hit 7 figures of speaking and coaching and courses? Like, how did you come to that decision?
Well, I'm ambitious, and I always tell people, ambition it's a double-edged sword. Ambition is both something that drives, and I love that I'm ambitious, because it's allowed me to do some things that, my resume is pretty steep at this point across a number of different. I've been successful both in ministry. I was successful in the speaking business. I've been successful in the political world and in some of the political work that I do. And ambition is what drives it. However, ambition is also a double-edged sword, because when you don't achieve the things, you feel bad, you feel like you're a failure, all those kinds of things, right? And so one of the things, going back to sort of, what the Bible talks about is a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't be ambitious. If you're a spiritual person, you shouldn't be ambitious. But I always tell them this: in the New Testament, the word ambition is used in a negative sense 5 times. 5 times the word ambition is used in a negative sense in the New Testament, but it's always preceded by one word. In each of those 5 instances, the same word is right before the word ambition. Do you know what the word is?
No.
Selfish. Selfish ambition. And it reminds me of the old Zig Ziglar quote: you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want out of life. So I believe that it's great to be ambitious, but we need to be not just consumed with, I want the money and I want the fame and I want the glory. You might get the money, the fame, and the glory. And I've made a lot of money and I've achieved a relatively well-known name. Heck, I've got my own Wikipedia page, right? So, it's kind of like, oh, I finally succeeded. I got my own Wikipedia page. But no, it's like, I view our time here on earth to be one that we're supposed to be in service to other people. And if you choose the right way of serving other people, then you will make more money than if you choose other ways of serving people. I'll give you an example. My gift has always been speaking and talking and articulating. When I was a minister, the most money I ever made as a minister was $72,000 in 1 year. I was paid $6,000 a month from basically 1993 till 2002, when I decided to go and write and speak full time. That was my salary, $6,000 a month. And in the greater Seattle area, that wasn't a lot of money when you have a wife and 4 kids. So, $72,000, but that's what I made. And the primary way that most people interacted with me was the sermon that I gave on Sunday morning. So I used my gifts and I made $72,000 a year. As a speaker, I make $30,000 an hour. So if somebody calls me up and says, we want you to come and speak, okay, great. Check, $30,000, make it payable to, and we're in business. I do the same thing. In one, you're giving a speech, to a church, and you make $6,000 a month. In another, you're giving a speech to a corporation, and they pay you $30,000 an hour. Somewhere in the middle would be like a college professor. Good college professor who has tenure at a good school with, good finances, they make $120,000, $140,000, $150,000 a year. Some really tenured professors who have some, longer time, they might make a couple $100,000 a year. And so in every situation, you're using the same gift, but different venues pay different ways. And so those are the things. Same with being a physician. If you want to be a physician, general practitioner might make $150,000, $200,000 a year. Brain surgeon, open heart surgeon, those kinds of surgeons, they might make $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year. Same
Wow.
with an attorney, a district attorney, or a public prosecutor or a public defender, 30, 40, 50,000 a year. DA, 70, 80, 100, $120,000 a year. Defense attorney, millions of dollars a year. Personal injury attorney can make, they get 40%. There was one guy, he did the Pennzoil thing back 30 years ago, and I think he made like $600 million was his cut. That was his cut, because they get 30, 40% of the payout. And I think it was a couple $1 billion payout, and his cut was hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But they're all doing the same thing, practicing law. So I think what I challenge people to do is, okay, what's your skill set? What's your passion? What are those things? And then what's the way to maximize your impact and maximize your money return?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's I'm so glad that there's like another quick analogy too, to kind of keep backing what you're saying, is like, if you think of a standard water bottle, if you go to Costco or a big store, it's like 25 cents or 10 cents a water bottle. But if you go to Whole Foods, it's like $3, $5 a water bottle. If you go to a hotel, it's $10 for a water bottle. And now there's a viral tweet going out about a guy where he went to a nightclub in Vegas. They charged $75 for one water bottle. and like you said, the water bottle doesn't change. It's still the same water. Maybe there's different casing or plastic or versus glass, but it's all about environment and how you apply that skill. And I think that's such a good reminder to people. You don't have to work as hard. You just have to have a certain skill to leverage in the right way.
Yeah.
So how did you, so obviously there's two levels here. The fact that you went from speaking for 6 years as a minister to being a professional speaker. I know a lot of people, quote unquote, they're like, I want to be a professional speaker and start from scratch right away. First, tell us, how did you make that shift going, okay, I'm going to go from a $5 water bottle to a $75 water bottle after that 6 years of ministry speaking?
Well, the funny thing is that in the speaking world, a lot of it is just the audacity to say this is what you charge. Because there are some $5,000 speakers who are better than the $60,000 speakers in terms of how good they are. A lot of it is branding. There is one speaker who shall remain nameless because I don't want to embarrass him, but he's one of the biggest speakers in the world. A lot of people would know who he is. I'm not talking about somebody famous, super, super famous like Tony Robbins, but somebody who's right now, he's really big, and he is an absolute phony. Total absolute phony. There are people who have actually done videos about him, and they show where he steals other people's stuff. He has built his entire, we're talking cover a magazine kind of person. He's been on the covers of magazines and all sorts of things, but there's been videos that have been done where they say, here's what Tony Robbins said, and then here's this other guy stealing it and claiming it's his own. Here's what Gandhi said. Here's this guy claiming it's his own. And they literally play it side by side, showing. But people think this guy's so amazing and so great, and he's completely deceived people. And most people, of course, are never going to do their due diligence. They're never going to realize this guy has basically just stolen everybody else's stuff and passed it off as his own. But I say that to make the point that if you can convince people that you're this super smart, super whatever person, you can charge a lot of money. You get invited to speak at a lot of events and these kinds of things. I think the best thing to do is to build your resume. So the way I went from a $1,500 an hour speaker, although, there was a time I was getting $500 an hour when I was doing youth speaking, $1,500 an hour all the way to $30,000 an hour. There's a couple things. Number one, you have to find a niche. And this is the same in almost any business, right? If you're a generalist, you're probably not going to make that much money. If in medicine, if you're a general practitioner, that's the lowest amount of money you're going to make. Oh, I'll see anybody. Come to my office. It's $50 for a visit, right? You don't make fortune doing that. But if you are a brain surgeon or a brain cancer surgeon, a lot less people, but the people who are left pay you a lot more money to actually do it. Same with law. If your specialty is, defending a certain kind of client, probably going to make a lot more money than if you'll just take anybody for any random DUI, thing or whatever. So in the speaking world, when I was a motivational speaker, I was competing against 20,000 other people. But then as a speaker now, it's really my whole speech, and probably the last 1,000 speeches I've given have been on the art of influence. It's about influencing other people, but it's not even so much about techniques of influence. It's about the character of influence, about who you are and your character and how that allows you to influence other people. And I think then there's just some other things. I mean, if you write a best-selling book, you can charge more. I'm very fortunate that I worked with three of the greatest legends of the industry, John Maxwell, Jim Rohn, and Zig Ziglar. Every time that happened, every book I released, every bestseller I had, every moment in my career where I had another accomplishment, I raised my fee. Because to me, and then there were actually a couple of times when I raised my fee when I heard about somebody else who was making more money than me, and I'm like, I'm better than that person, and I raised my fee above them. When I'm making 12.5 and I look at somebody and they're like, they charge 15, okay, I'm 17.5 now. And literally that's what I did, because I'm like, I'm better than that person and I have a better resume than that person. So I would say,
real quick too, isn't there a story where you charged your fee based on what the budget of an event was one time?
Yeah. There was one time I was charging $4,500 a speech. And I got a phone call from this woman, and she said, my CEO read an article that you wrote in a magazine, and he told me to hire you to come and speak. And I said, okay, great. And they said, you're our last speaker to hire. And I said, oh, perfect, I'm in. And they said, well, what do you charge? And I said, $4,500. And she said, well, how about if I pay you $6,000? And I said, done. And then I asked her, I said, why did you offer to pay me more? And she said, well, here's the dirty little secret. I have $6,000 left in my budget. And if I don't spend it, then next year they're not going to give it to me. So I'm going to give you the last $6,000 I have in my budget. And from that point forward, I charged $6,000. That's how I raised my fee that time. That's how I went from a $4,500 an hour speaker to a $6,000 an hour speaker.
That's crazy. And so that's so cool. You literally went from charging $500 all the way up to 30 grand. And it's fascinating too to learn how you did that in increments. And it goes back to the Sistine Chapel. You can't paint the Sistine Chapel out of the gate.
Unless you win a gold medal at 18, then you start at $60,000 an hour. But no, here was my trajectory. I went from 500 to 1,500 to 3,000 to 4,500 to 7,500 to 10,000 to 12,500 to 17,500 to 20 to 25 to 30. Those were the increments over the course from 1988 to today. Those were the points and the increments that I charged, and I raised my fee every time I had a significant business or career success or an honor or those kinds of things.
I love that. And I do want to talk about, it is interesting when you mention how this person stole the content of other people. So when you're saying steal, you're saying word for word,
word for word. They would show the meme, and it would say, I don't say this to impress you, but to impress upon you, Tony Robbins. And then this person would do and he's viral everywhere. You can't get on the internet without seeing the guy. And it's him, and he's talking, and then he'll say this, and the little thing comes up, and it says, I don't say this to impress upon you, but to impress you, but to impress upon you. And that has his name at the bottom. He literally swipes people's stuff and puts his name. And the video is really damning, because this person who did the expose of him, she literally just puts them up side by side, shows him actually stealing the other person's stuff. So, and I'm a little bit more sensitive to that, because having worked with Jim Rohn is the most stolen from speaker I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
And, having worked 7 years with him and wrote his last book with him, I know all of his stuff. I can't tell you how often I'm sitting there in an audience and I hear some other speaker try to pass off some Jim Rohnism. And in fact, I see it happen on the internet sometimes. People will do a Jim Rohn quote: work harder on yourself than you do on your job. That's a Jim Rohn thing. And then they'll just post it. No credit, no nothing. I always jump in and I say, I love Jim Rohn. He's an amazing, great quote. Thanks for sharing it. And then, and then they're like, oh, yeah. I forgot to put his name on there. That happens to Jim Rohn all the time. People pass his stuff off all the time.
Well, I do want to. So the interesting thing about that, so admittedly, I have read the book "The Game" by Neil Strauss, and one of the big takeaways I like from that book is how he talks about how he met all these different experts in the field, and he took the best content, what he thought was from each expert, to create himself as his own expert. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about, creating your own content, even though that content already came from somewhere else, but like figuring out, like retooling it in your own way, versus feeling guilty about just taking someone else's content. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, for sure. Now, I will say, I'll start by saying this. The book of Ecclesiastes says, of the writing of books, there is no end. And, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah,
So there is
exactly.
nothing new under the sun. However, you can't take a phrase like, you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want out of life. That's a Zig Ziglarism. Zig coined it. Zig said it in every speech. If all you're doing is paraphrasing and just readjusting the words, you're just stealing, right? And so to me, if you can come up with a different way of producing that concept without just flipping the words around, instead of Zig Ziglar said the red car or the blue car stopped at the red stop sign. And you go, and your famous saying is, at the red stop sign, a blue car sat. You're just stealing, right?
Yeah.
To me, I quote a lot of people in my speeches. And the reason that I quote people is I think that it makes me look smarter. It makes me look well-read. For example, you've asked me a number of things today. You asked me about we talked about costly grace. And I said, there's an old theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I credited Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I gave you a little bit of story about it. I could have just said, well, I think it's the difference between cheap grace and costly grace. I could have passed that whole concept off as my own. But you know what? It tells people, wow, this guy just pulled a Bonhoeffer quote, right? Like, he must be smart. He must be well-read. Or you talked about original sin. One of my favorite quotes of all time is G.K. Chesterton, the old Catholic theologian. I've quoted Jim Rohn. I've quoted Zig Ziglar. I've quoted Tony Robbins, all in the midst of this thing. It doesn't demonstrate how smart and original I am, but it does demonstrate how well-read I am, and my ability to grasp information from various sources, pull it in, and help me make my point. And so to me, that's the job. My career sort of mid-90s was doing time management seminars. That was kind of my first foray into speaking to adults as opposed to youth that I started with. And I literally read like 30 books on time management. I watched 5 videos, 10 videos on time management, like everything about, and I called it the Ultimate Time Management Seminar. But when I went through the seminar, I gave credit to the people that I pulled from, right? Yeah. And so I didn't pass it off as, look how smart I am. I created the Ultimate Time Management Seminar. People said, oh, Chris pulled all this together to create the best of the best. So to me, not only is it ethical to actually give credit where credit is due, I think it actually makes you look smarter. And there's an old joke in the speaker world that, the first time you quote somebody, you say, well, as Joe Schmo says, XYZ. And the second time you say, as it's been said, XYZ. And the third time you say it, you say, as I always say, XYZ, right? And that's the way a lot of people rip people off. Mm-hmm. I believe ethically you need to tell where the thing came from. And it also actually makes you look smarter because it makes you look like you're well-read.
I love that. And I know, like, I'm sure I've forgotten to give credit where credit's due sometimes. And that is interesting that maybe even on a subconscious level, we think, oh, of course I came up with that.
I have a thing in my speech. I've given a speech 1,000 times. And in my speech, I talk about this concept about integrity, and integrity shares the same root word as the old math term integer. Now, I would have never, and so an integer is a whole number. And so integrity means to operate out of wholeness. It means to operate out of a single set of morals, ethics, and values, not a dual set of morals, ethics. That's integrity, right? Well, when I tell that, I cannot for the life of me remember where I read that. It was not an original concept to me. I didn't figure out that integrity and integer share the same root word. So every speech I give, I tell the people, I don't remember who said it, but this is not an original concept to me. I wish I could remember who said it so I could give them credit. Yeah. Still to this day, 17 years after giving that speech for the first time, I still tell people I didn't come up with this, some person whose name I can't remember. And I'm hoping that someday that man or woman is in the audience, or someday somebody says, oh, that's from the book such and such by so-and-so. And from that point forward, I will give them credit, because I think ethically we have to do that.
17 years and still no one knows where that quote came
No,
from.
no, I don't even remember. I think I read it in a book or a magazine or something, or I heard it on a speech. I don't know. But I always tell people, this isn't original to me, but here's the concept.
I think we all know it's going to end up being credited to you, Chris.
Yeah, probably.
But at least your conscience was clear about it. You did your best. So.
Yeah. And you know what? There's a great thing to having a clear conscience.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I want to shift into relationships a little bit. So we're talking about quotes and all that. How did you go right out of the gate working with John Maxwell and Jim Rohn and
well, it wasn't out of the gate.
People?
I started speaking in 1988. I started working with John Maxwell in 2002. So 14 years. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was a pastor from 88 till 2002. I was a pastor, but I also was building my speaking business on the sides. So I was preaching in church, but I was also speaking at corporations. Well, a lot of people don't know that John Maxwell had sort of the same journey. He was a pastor and he used to do pastors' seminars. And I remember I took a graduate course, a ministry graduate course from John Maxwell before anybody outside the church had ever heard of him. And I took a course up in Seattle at a graduate school there from John Maxwell before anybody knew who he was.
Wow.
And so when he got out and started doing speaking full time, he wrote a book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and it be bestseller, sold millions of copies. And that sort of put him on the map. And when they were looking for somebody to do writing with him, they wanted somebody that could get his voice. Well, I got his voice because I was a minister turned business speaker, and he was a minister turned business speaker. So I sort of got his mindset and his verbiage and a lot of that kind of stuff. And so for little under 2 years, I wrote his nationally syndicated column and worked on that.
Wow. And so John Maxwell was that stepping stone to working with Jim Rohn?
Yeah. So Jim Rohn called me up and said, hey, would you come and write? And I said, well, I'd like my name on the stuff. So we wrote the Jim Rohn 1 year program, which was a 52-week personal development program. They still sell it today. If you go to jimrohn.com, you can still buy that thing. I wrote that thing from October 2002 till September 2003. And I still make royalties on it every single month. Wow. And then we turned that into a book called 12 Pillars, which was Jim Rohn's last book he ever wrote, 12 Pillars. And the 12 Pillars are based on the 12 pillars of the 1 year success program. Every month had a different pillar. So 12 Pillars, we wrote a book called 12 Pillars. And still to this day, I just got my deposit. Success Magazine owns Jim Rohn International now. And just about 3 or 4 days ago, I saw my royalties got dumped into my bank account, and it's from 12 Pillars and the Jim Rohn 1 year success plan.
Wow. And speaking of royalties, just curious, what is your top income earner? Is it the speaking, or do you have other endeavors like real estate or anything like that?
I have a lot of different things, partly because I'm ADD and partly because I understand that you need to diversify. But I make money coaching. I make money speaking. I make money on royalties. I'll tell you a funny story. I have a bunch of different publishers who publish my stuff, 3 or 4 main publishers that I still get royalties from. And one of them is based in Seattle, and they have probably 40 of my audio programs and books, and they have a whole bunch of derivatives of them as well. But my number one bestseller from that publisher, and they have 30 or 40 titles, my number one bestseller is one little book, and it represents half of my royalties from that publisher, even though they have 30 or 40 of my titles. And it's a little book called How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere. And it's a book on how to build quick rapport with people. And I wrote it because there's so many people that if they go to a wedding reception or a funeral, or they plop down into an airplane next to somebody and it's going to be a 4-hour flight, a lot of people don't know how to start a conversation. And so I wrote a little book. It's short book, and it's called How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere. And that's my number one bestseller from one of my publishers is one book equals half of all my royalties from that particular publisher.
Wow. And I think, and that wasn't the first book you ever wrote, right? Like it still took you a few books
No, the
to
first
write.
book that I ever wrote was called Made for Success. In the middle 90s, I got on the internet and I started an email newsletter. And pretty soon I had 100,000 subscribers. By about 96, 97, I had 100,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And I decided I'm going to write my first book. And actually, this is a parenthetical statement. My next book, which is coming out in October, called 4 Seasons, it's already pre-sale on Amazon. That book is actually the first book I ever wrote. I wrote it in 1993, and it has sat on a shelf for 29 years.
Wow.
It's coming out 29 years after I wrote it. But the first book I actually published was called Made for Success, because my company was called Made for Success. And I wrote it by writing a chapter per week and sending it out to my newsletter. So first chapter was 1 week, second chapter was the next week. And when I had 12 or 13 chapters, I put them all together. I self-published, I put them into a Word document, I uploaded it to the cloud. And next thing you know, I got a box full of books. It was crappy. It looked bad. It had bad graphics, the whole thing. But that was my first book, Made for Success. The second book I wrote was, I had another little newsletter that I did called Success Quotes. It was a daily quote. So I took a quote from somebody else and then I wrote a paragraph about the quote. So it was 2 paragraphs. You could kind of get a little boost every single day. And I took that and I created almost like a calendar thing. It had the little a coil binding, and so you could put it on your desk and you could flip to the next quote and then flip to the next quote and flip to the next quote. That was the second book I ever wrote, and then from there I've written lots of ebooks and regular books. Some of them are out of print now, some of them are still in print.
Yeah, I think I'm reading the book Cashvertising right now, and he talks about how those books that just say a daily quote are very, very popular and successful. Do you agree? Was it Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn who said that motivation's like bathing? It's recommended daily.
Zig Ziglar.
Yeah.
That was Zig Ziglar. Yeah, people say, "Oh, I don't want to get more." Well, motivation's like a bath. We recommend doing it daily.
Yeah. So how do you keep yourself motivated, inspired, and constantly, and well, obviously you have this innate ambitiousness, which is awesome, but how do you stay motivated and inspired to keep pushing through obstacles and staying resilient?
I read a lot. I surround myself with other people who are like me, who are like-minded. I don't suffer fools, and I don't hang around them much. I start every day. My wife and I, we get up and we make ourselves coffee. And now we live in Tennessee. We have a sunroom out in the back. It's got screened-in porch with a fireplace and nice chairs and everything. We go out there. If it's during the winter, we turn the fire on and we sit down with a cup of coffee and we read a book together. We typically will read what they call a daily devotional. It's like a 1-page, kind of gives you a thought for the day. And then we'll read a little bit from the Bible. And then we read a book, a different kind of book. We might read a marriage book. We might read, we read together. And we probably spend 20 to 30 minutes at the very beginning of every day doing that. We did it today. And so we begin each day sort of setting the course for the day. And then I read throughout the day. I've always got a number of different books that I'm reading and some of those kinds of things.
No, it makes sense. And while you're talking about your partner as well, how do you balance that personal professional relationship? Do you guys work together professionally as well? And how do you make sure you spend enough time on your craft versus spend time with your spouse?
You're talking about Denise?
Yes.
Well, she's an executive with AT&T. She also owns a real estate company, and I help her a little bit with the real estate company. She handles my booking, for speaking engagements and those kinds of things. But no, she has her own stuff that she does. I have my own stuff, but we dabble and do some things together as well.
But do you guys? So it sounds like, but to make sure you guys both spend enough time together, you spend time each morning. Sounds like you check in at the night. Do you have like weekly how's it going calls or monthly required dates, or how do you balance that?
It's just us. The kids are all grown, so we're together a lot. We both work from home, so it's actually, that's the easy part, actually, is spending time together. But we go out on date nights and we try to have fun. And Amos Lee is coming to town here, the singer. So I bought tickets because she's an Amos Lee fan. I literally, if you stuck a gun to my head and said, name an Amos Lee song, I couldn't name it. But I looked him up and I listened. I'm like, oh yeah, I like this music. So we're going to Amos Lee here coming up. He's coming to Chattanooga. So we've got tickets for him. And, we'll go see movies. We just went and saw Maverick. One of our daughters is home for the summer from Vanderbilt. And so we went and saw Maverick together on the IMAX. We get out and we do fun things. We travel together. We just got back from a week in Mexico. A friend of ours, a very wealthy gentleman, owns a private residence on the Sea of Cortez, and I helped him out on some business stuff. And he said, "Hey, go spend some time in my place." And so I'm like, "Okay, cool." And I said, "I'm sure it's nice, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "It's nice." He said, "Last week I rented it to Leonardo DiCaprio." So, so I'm like, okay, it must be nice. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place and a nice place. So,
and you mentioned, the importance of spending time with people who are like-minded. How do you vet people who you spend time with, who you keep in your circle?
It's funny. My son says to me, "Why do you only hang around with rich people?" And I said to him, I said, it's not the fact that they're rich, and it's not true. First of all, I hang around with lots of people who are not rich, but we'll talk on the phone and I'll say, "Oh, I was hanging out with so-and-so. And he'll say to me every now and then, "Why do you only hang around with rich people?" And I said, it's not that I hang around with rich people. I hang around with interesting people. And a lot of interesting people have become rich. So I don't hang around with anybody who's a trust fund baby. I don't have any of my friends who just inherited a bunch of money. The people who I have as friends who are wealthy, they've built real estate empires. They've been professional athletes. They've started clothing manufacturing companies. The gentleman who gave us the house in Mexico was the founder and owns one of the largest athletic wear companies in America. So it's not the fact that they're rich, like, "Oh, you're rich, I got to hang out with you." It's, "Wow, you're really fascinating. How did you do that? What was that like?" And then I become friends with who they are, and they just happen to be rich. So to me, I find people fascinating. I used to have an interview show, and Darren Hardy, a lot of you probably know who Darren Hardy is. He was the publisher of Success Magazine. Prior to that, he was the president of the television network where I had my first TV show, and it was called Made for Success, and it was an interview show. And he came to me once and he said, "I watch your show more than any other show on our network." And I said, "Really? Why?" And he goes, "You are an amazing interviewer." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you so much." He goes, "What makes you such an amazing interviewer?" And I said, "Well, if I had to guess, it's because I find people interesting. I really find people. I'll give you an example. I interviewed a guy named John Connors once, and John has become a friend of mine. John is the managing partner at Ignition Partners in Seattle. He is the only guy to ever hold 2 C-level positions at Microsoft. He was their chief financial officer and he was their chief information officer. So I interviewed him on my television show called Made for Success. And I'd done my research beforehand, and I knew that he grew up on a farm and that he was really big into conservation. He goes to the rodeo in Las Vegas, the big international rodeo in Las Vegas every year. And so we're talking, and I'm doing this interview, and I said to him, I said, "How does a guy go from growing up on a farm and being into like buffalo conservation and being a rodeo fan to being the only guy to hold 2 C-level positions at the biggest," and this was pre-Apple and pre-Tesla, the biggest company, the most valuable company, the biggest, most influential tech company in the history of the world? And he said, "Chris, do you know how many farm boys there are in the top 20 people at Microsoft?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, this guy and this guy." And I lived in Seattle, so I knew a lot of their names. This guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. He named 7 people in the top 20 people at Microsoft who grew up on a farm. Well, all of a sudden, our conversation switched. I'm like, what is it about growing up on a farm? And, you could probably guess. Discipline, hard work, all those kinds of things, right?
Timing,
all those kinds of things. And so I find people fascinating. And that's what made me a good interviewer, because I just find people's stories really, really interesting, and all the different ways that people get to success. I went to a fundraiser once, big giant house, 15,000 square feet, and it was a fundraiser. And I was new to town. So I end up in this big, beautiful house. I mean, views for like 40 miles. And the guy and I had ended up becoming really close friends. But this was the first time I didn't even know who he was. When I was at the fundraiser, I didn't even know who the owner was. But you know, you go to these fundraisers and you grab your glass of wine, and you're sitting off in the corner like, oh, I wonder if anybody's going to talk to me. And I start talking to this guy, and so I say to him, I say, hey, what does the guy do that owns this place? And he says, oh, he's an orthodontist. And I said, this isn't orthodontist money. This is tech money. And he goes, oh, well, he invented this software that like 80% of all orthodontists use to run their practice. And I'm like, that's really fascinating to me. Well, some point over the course of the night, this guy walks up to me and says, hey, I'm the owner. Thanks for coming. We started talking, and I started talking about technology. And next thing he goes, we should go to lunch. And we have just become fast friends. Not because he's rich, but because he's fascinating.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of rich people who I have no desire to hang out with, because they bore me, or they inherited their money and they've not done anything with it, or, you know, all sorts of things like that. I'm interested in people who've done really interesting things.
I love that. And I think that's one of my top life hacks is life too, is just like, in order to get along with people, be genuinely curious and interested, and also make them feel good every chance you get.
Absolutely.
And it's been my life hack. Well, I know we have a couple minutes left. Just want to do some rapid fire questions.
All right.
Chris, anything else that you wish you had done early in your own professional career that would have helped get you faster to where you wanted to go?
No, in fact, I would say the opposite. I wish that I would have appreciated every stage of my career rather than wishing I was at the next stage of my career. You're going to get there. How old are you, Andrew? I'm guessing are you 30, 28, 29?
28. Yeah.
I'm 56, and you're going to be 56 sooner than you know it. You're going to be going to college graduation sooner than you know it. My wife said to me today, we have a daughter at University of Alabama, and we were driving in, and she said, how did we end up with a college senior? And I said, well, you just lived enough years. And so, you know, enjoy being single, and then enjoy being married with no kids, and then enjoy those little babies, and then enjoy going to their games, and then enjoy shipping them off to college and being empty nesters again, and then enjoy bringing them back home with their grandbabies. Don't wish for the next stage, because the next stage is coming soon enough. Make sure, reminds me of an old Jim Rohn quote, be content with what you have while you pursue what you want. Well, you can sort of paraphrase that. Be content with where you're at while you're on your journey to the next stage.
Oh, that's amazing. And thanks for giving that takeaway to the audience as we finish up here. Chris, this has been so helpful, so amazing. Hopefully thousands and millions of people listen to this because the gems you dropped. What's the best way people can get a hold of you, reach out to you, connect with you more, and learn more?
Yeah, they can follow me either on Instagram or Facebook at Chris Widener Speaker. They can follow me on Twitter at Chris Widener. They can Google me. They can find me on YouTube, any of the different places, plenty of places they can find me.
Perfect. All right, everyone, that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much. Make sure to give us a review, give us a comment, anything you learned, and show Chris your appreciation, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, y'all.